Okay, onto our second bit of attachment. So we've looked at this idea of caregiver-infant interactions and how important having that primary caregiver, how that important interactional synchrony and reciprocity is to the development of healthy attachments. Now we need to look at the idea of attachment progressing through stages. So another key bit of research in this section, we'll need to look at Schaefer and Emerson and how they developed this idea of a staged development of attachment. So we need to know that bit of research. We'll need to know and some evaluation points for it. And this is quite a nice small section to give us a little bit more of an idea into the process of attachment. So we'll start with some keywords that are here. A few that we need to understand. It would have been a match-up, but I'll just give them for you here. So a multiple attachment is simply more than one attachment figure. When you look at Schaefer and Emerson's research, they argue that it isn't just one attachment that's really important, but more. So having attachment with the father, grandparents, siblings, they all play a role. It's just what role they play. That primary caregiver then, so we looked at it last time, the primary attachment figure is the person who the child has the closest bond with. So it comes down to the intensity of the relationship. It's usually, a lot of research is into the biological mother, but other people can also fill that role. So if you're really young, it could potentially be adopted or living with grandparents or so on. They can become your primary attachment figure. Separation anxiety then is basically any distress that a child feels when they are separated from their caregiver. Not necessarily the biological mother, it could be if, they have a father as a primary caregiver, any sort of attachment behaviours that they show when they're separated. And lastly, stranger anxiety. So any distress when someone unfamiliar enters a room or they are encouraged to play with somebody unfamiliar, it can cause quite a bit of distress. So there's some keywords for this section. The task to start that I've attached is basically for you to have a look and place some of the behaviours at the bottom of the sheet in the correct stage. Again, I've put tasks in here, a bit of application. I do urge you to do them before you look at the answers. So be good, pause this now, go away, do that, and then we'll go through it. So hopefully you did that, and I'm gonna have trust that you did. And this is some of the descriptions of behaviour for each. So if you're in that asocial stage, according to Schaefer and Emerson, that's about 0 to 8 weeks, where, there's not really much distinction between different caregivers. You prefer faces to non-faces, smile at anyone. You do recognise some specific faces, happier when you're in the presence of humans than when you're alone. And it's kind of, you have a preference, but nothing really specific as of yet. Indiscriminate is about 2 to 7 months, so you recognise and prefer familiar people, familiar faces. You have a preference rather than inanimate objects, and you accept comfort for pretty much any adult. Again, there's nothing specific. Until we reach 7 to 12 months. That primary attachment figure becomes where you signal a lot of your cues, a lot of your reciprocity takes place with that specific caregiver. You've got anxiety when there's strangers around and separation anxiety, and those familiar adults become a secure base, and we'll look at that when we look at it a couple of lessons time, a whole bit of research into anxiety. Multiple attachment, so they were the first to kind of put forward that you don't just have one figure. So 1 year onwards, you form secondary attachments with other familiar adults, father, grandparents, siblings. That happens after a year. So hopefully, you can start to pick out some issues with this model. It's very specific. It's saying that people fit into certain categories, and that could be a major problem with it. So there's a sheet attached here on Schaefer and Emerson. It gives you a little bit more of an understanding. Have a read of it and have a look at some of the research methods that we can take out from this. Because like with any study, like with anything, you can pick out specifics from the methodology that you can use for AO3. So what method did they use? What was the problem with some of the participants? What did they investigate in terms of infant behaviour? Is there any strength in interviewing mothers in their homes? When do they have multiple attachments? How many stages? Sensitive responsiveness, another key word, what does that mean? And then why do they claim there's no evidence that mothering can't be shared by more than one person? Okay, so pause this, do that, we'll come back. If you're struggling with those different stages, and you're not really sure in terms of how to distinguish them, a bit of AO2 that you can have a go and practice. So Bobby, just started to be really interested in people around me. I don't mind cuddles, who cuddles me, and I'm not particularly bothered if they come or go. So in terms of which stage, that's indiscriminate. There's nothing specific as of yet. We've got Marion. It's a really good name. I don't want mum to leave me at all, and other people come and just makes me cry. So that's quite a very early stage. That would be specific because it's all about that primary caregiver. Timmy likes mum and dad and gran, and my mobile and my blanket. I'm really upset and like to be with my mum. So he's got a few multiple attachments there, but still in that asocial stage right at the beginning because he's not really specific to any of them. He likes them all. And then Lucy, like mum and dad, have a lovely key worker at nursery who looks after me. We get on great. She's really nice if I'm upset. So not only has she made a bond with mum and dad, but also at nursery, other individuals creating those bonds. So we're obviously not going to do an evaluation carousel. What I have got is just a variety of research methods, AO3 that you can pick out. So you've started to do that. Even though it is a really fascinating bit of research, there are loads of things that we can pick out here. So because they're looking at mothers and it's a self-report of mothers in their home, mums are going to lie, aren't they? Because they don't want to look awful, they don't look like a bad parent. So actually, some of the data that we have could be quite unreliable. It's based on reports of parents, of mothers. Some are less sensitive to their infants' requests for love and for attention, some are more. And if they are less sensitive, they're not going to report it because they don't, a bit of demand characteristics here. So that's a problem with some of the data that we have. Ben's favourite, mundane realism. So actually it has great mundane realism and external validity because it is in a place where it's, you know, everyday life in their house. Conclusions can actually be drawn from this and we can make some good assumptions. I say that, but a nice however statement is, it's an observation. So they're given questionnaires, they're obviously being observed in their home. You know, every experience is subjective. When it comes to recording data and an observation, you're going to miss things, so you might not get everything. A really small sample, small scale, difficult to generalise. They're just in Scotland, they're just a group of individuals there, it's quite hard. And in terms of how we influence and how we look at extraneous variables, control can be quite difficult in these types of research. Okay, so we've got some positives that it's really highly valid, but some of the method used makes it a problem. I mentioned the sample there, so a variety of different social classes would be better here, but we're just looking at a working class group of families in Glasgow in the 1960s. You can't really replicate it either, I would say, because it is a longitudinal study, so it makes it quite difficult to do. Then we have some issues, but we've also got some strengths. So because we're not in a lab, some of the results could be more truthful. It means that we've got a lot of data that we can easily analyse. It's quite quick and easy. And if we were to replicate it, which it hasn't, it's quite easy to repeat. We've just got to find a group of individuals who would be happy for you to go into their house and interview them. So that's research methods. Some of the theoretical problems that we have here then. So like I said, it's a stage theory. So they're assuming that everybody goes through the exact same stage at the same time, at that age, and shows the same things. That's a problem because we can't be that assumptive. We can't make those sort of guesses and generalizations. So really, that makes it hard to generalize because in some families, like it says there, multiple attachments come first. Depending on culture, you could be brought up by 2 or 3 different people at the same time. You have the same amount of contact with them. So you can't judge everyone as being in that box, being in that pattern. We've got major differences between infants, lots of individual differences. So how do we know that it's just biology that creates attachment formation? It's got to be lots of other factors. So it makes it also quite difficult to generalise. Cultural variations are quite interesting. So individualistic and collectivist cultures raise children differently. And a bit like, the multiple attachments coming first, in a collectivist culture, that's most likely to take place. Possessions, childcare, they're shared amongst a variety of different people. So they're not going to fit what Schaefer and Emerson are putting out that is the norm. And then lastly, quite interestingly, society has changed massively. So instead of there being such a emphasis on mum staying at home, looking after the children, we've got a lot of dads that do that now. 21st century, so we can't really be accurate that, it's all about that specific attachment with mum. It could be specific attachment with dad. Okay, so it's quadrupled how many men are now staying at home, being that staying at home parent. So that's quite difficult to make assumptions from. Where are we? Okay. Some conflicting but also supporting research here. So a nice bit of AO3 that you can do is bring in evidence that actually backs up some research into a theory or into an idea. So I won't read these out actually. I'll leave them for you to have a look at and decide what are conflicting, which ones are supporting. And then we briefly touched on this last lesson when we looked at caregiver-infant interactions, is this idea of what does the father do in a household? What is their role? So because, mothers are seen as having more sensitive responsiveness, it's maybe biologically trained to be a good parent, to have that nurturing side. What is it that the role of the father actually is and what has it become? So we've got a variety of factors that are affecting the relationship between father and children, how sensitive they are to a child's demands, a child's cries, for example. What is the attachment they have with their own parents? Have they always been that close to them or not at all? That can impact on how they are as a father. Marital intimacy, so if they have a good relationship with their partner, that's going to impact on how much maybe they want to take part in the child's life. And if they are supportive in co-parenting, they're happy to do the physical side of having a child as well as the emotional side. So I've got some summary cards that I've also attached. Have a read of them, sort them into role of the father in primary attachment and evidence against. So what supports it, what goes against it. Again, do this. Do not just wait. And here we are. So, right, where are we? So a bit of exam practice. I am going to keep setting you homework that I want you to email to me, that I will give you feedback on via email. Practice writing some of those questions. So outline the role of the father in the development of attachment. That's 6 marks. So you need to use all those evaluation for and against. You need to look at just outline. So what is the role of the father? For 6 marks, that's quite a lot. There's a lot of development in there. But make sure you do some practice so that it fully makes sense. The next lesson, we'll move on to looking at some different attachment security types.